In 1994, Russian troops invaded Chechnya to crush the small republic's demands for independence in the wake of the fall of the Soviet Union. Relentless airstrikes reduced cities to rubble and cost the lives of tens of thousands. Surprisingly, despite the superior military, Russia lost that war. And in 1997, the last humiliated Russian troops left Chechnya, only to invade again 3 years later, when President Boris Yeltsin's newly named prime minister, a former KGB operative named Vladimir Putin, launched a disastrous, all-out assault that laid waste to the Chechen capital of Grozny. Russian tanks rolled into Chechnya for the second time, and this time, Russian forces took control after only a few months and installed a Kremlin-friendly leader. It's the same brutality that we're seeing today. Putin's army pounding towns and residential areas, deliberately targeting civilians. Similar to the resistance in Chechnya, Ukrainians are fighting back and still hold Kyiv. And so Putin has doubled down, bombing maternity hospitals and homes, forcing survivors to emerge from the destruction and risk being bombed again as they flee. The dead left in mass graves. The horror we saw in Chechnya is here again. And joining me now is Russian opposition politician Vladimir Kara-Murza. And I always feel so lucky to be able to talk to you. I feel like, and you've said this before, and I actually got this from you, so I'm just going to say what you said to me back to you. Putin does this because he keeps getting away with it. He got away with it in Syria. He definitely got away with it in Chechnya. So how do we avoid the same outcome that we see in Chechnya, which now is a puppet government? How do we avoid that in Ukraine?
And thank you for reminding your viewers that, the war in Chechnya was Vladimir Putin's original sin. This was how he came to power. And it wasn't just the war in Chechnya. It was also the false flag apartment bombings in Moscow and other Russian cities, which at the time was clear to many people that these were likely staged by the FSB, the Domestic Security Service, which Putin himself headed before he became prime minister. And now almost nobody doubts that this was a deliberate provocation. I mean, imagine the mindset of a man who would blow up peaceful citizens of his own country sleeping because those apartment bombings happened in the middle of the night, just to create a pretext for war and to sort of ratchet up this, propaganda in order to come to power. This is how he began.
Well, I remember the sort of sickening pictures of him in his little flight suit, sort of triumphantly coming in like he had, won World War II single-handedly and set himself up for what he's become now.
Right. And, of course, the first thing Putin did when he came to power, when he became president after President Boris Yeltsin had resigned, he started another war, which was a war against civil society, political opposition, and independent media in Russia. And within the first, literally, few years of his rule, he'd shut down all the independent television networks. He'd ejected the real opposition from parliament. He began imprisoning his opponents. And all this while, basically transformed Russia from the imperfect democracy we had back in the 90s to the perfect dictatorship it is today. And all this time, Western leaders, both West European and North American, continued to welcome him to summits, shake his hand, offer him red carpet treatment and so on. We've talked about this many times.
Looking into his eyes and seeing his soul,
declaring resets and so on.
Everything.
Exactly. And so, this is the way a dictator's mindset works. This is why appeasement of dictators never works. It's always the most horrible idea imagined because, for a normal democratic leader, compromise is a good thing, right? But if you are a dictator, an aggressive autocratic dictator like Vladimir Putin, if somebody compromises with you, to you, that's a sign of weakness, and that's an invitation to grab more and more. And so after completing his crackdown domestically in Russia, after destroying all the last vestiges of democracy and of the institutions, checks and balances inside of the country, Mr. Putin inevitably turned his attention outward, because in Russia, domestic repression and external aggression, are always two sides of the same story. And so after that, he turned his attention on Georgia, and as you know, took away part of its territory. After that, of course, was Ukraine. And let's not forget, what we're seeing in the last 3 weeks is a horrendous escalation. But the attack on Ukraine actually began 8 years ago in February of 2014. And the first formal state-to-state territorial annexation in Europe since the end of the Second World War, which Mr. Putin accomplished in Crimea. And he also, largely speaking, got away with this. And then, of course, the horrible war crimes in Syria, the bombing of Aleppo and so on. And so just, put yourself in his shoes. If he can get away with all of this for 22 years, then why not try what he's trying now? Except, I think, of course, this time he tried to bite more than he can chew. And this time, even for those Western appeasers who were willing to look the other way for such a long time, the sight of, cluster bombs in residential areas, the bombings of maternity wards, schools, hospitals in the middle of Europe, even for them, that is too much.
Well, so the question then becomes, what do you do about it? Because, you know, this idea that if Ukraine promises to not be in NATO, he'll stop. If they demilitarize, he'll stop. I mean, why would he stop? He's already grabbed huge chunks of that country. Why doesn't he just come back for more, especially if they demilitarize? Igor Novikov was just on a little bit before, and he said that Russia is deteriorating into North Korea. And so the question is, what do you do about it? He talked about the fact that Arnold Schwarzenegger has put this piece out on Telegram where he's speaking with Russian subtitles, trying to speak into Russia, and that the only way to sort of bring down that regime, and you said this, is from within. Can things like that actually help?
They can, and I think one of the biggest priorities for the free world, for Western democracies now, alongside obviously, helping Ukraine withstand the aggression from Putin's regime, the other priority should be getting the truth to the Russian people, because, in the last 3 weeks, Putin launched a war not only on Ukraine, but also, which is stalling, by the way, as you've been reporting all these past weeks. But the other blitzkrieg that he launched, unfortunately very successfully, was the destruction of what remained of independent media in Russia, including the legendary Echo of Moscow radio station, which was for so many years the symbol of high-quality journalism in Russia, where I had my weekly show until 2 weeks ago. Everything is destroyed. And so the only source of quote-unquote information for Russian citizens now is state propaganda. And, the only strategic endgame to this, the only solution, the only way to stop this seemingly unending streak of crimes and repressions and wars of aggression that Vladimir Putin has been leading is to have this deranged, murderous dictator out of power. Only Russians in Russia can do that. Nobody obviously is advocating regime change from the outside. But what is important is that the free world stands in solidarity with the civil society in Russia and helps the Russian people get the truth, get the objective information about these horrendous war crimes and crimes against humanity that the Putin regime is committing supposedly on behalf of our country.
What do you say to the heads of companies like the Koch brothers who say, well, we're providing valuable services, we're not getting out?
Well, I think they're going to hear from their consumers in Western democracies. We've seen this. I mean, the history of boycotting such regimes is a long and noble history. I mean, South Africa. Apartheid, and then many other similar cases. So I think those companies that refuse to do this will pay dearly. But what I think is also important to say now is that, I very much hope that all those companies, including McDonald's and others, return to Russia very soon, but not because they will cave in to Putin's dictatorship, but because Putin's dictatorship will no longer be in power. Because
it's gone. I want to note, you did note that Alexei Navalny is potentially facing 13 years in prison. That is still coming. We're going to continue following that as well, because he's imprisoning people like yourself who are politicians who are trying to make Russia.
And the verdict is coming on Tuesday, March 22nd.
And you know what? But what South Africa's regime and what Putin's regime have in common? Fascists. They're fascist dictatorships, and that's how we should refer to them. These are not governments of the people. Vladimir Kara-Murza, thank you. I always appreciate talking with you. And